In the summer of 2012, LinkedIn was hacked. The passwords and usernames and emails for nearly 6.5 million users were stolen. You might start thinking to yourself, well, Dave, this is old news. This is 9 years ago. What does that have to do with working from home? Well, how was LinkedIn hacked? LinkedIn had all of the security practices implemented that you would expect from a major company that's going to hold information on 6.5 million or more users, especially business users and politicians and powerful people. LinkedIn was designed at the time, as most places were, for their users to be working in the office, behind the firewall, on the network, etc. When the hackers decided that they wanted to breach LinkedIn, they began by actually looking at LinkedIn, finding out who are the engineers and trying to find somebody who maybe was going to be working from home, because they thought, well, if they're working from home, maybe we can figure out how to hack them at home because their security at home will be a lot less than at work. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. One of the engineers from LinkedIn had a personal computer that was hacked. The hackers used that to then bypass the security and get right in and steal that information. Now, obviously, technically, there's a lot more that happened than just that. But the point of the story is that end users are often the weakest link in security and information security. And so today we want to talk about working from home and what should you consider. And obviously, with the last year with COVID, something we've had to do. So Steve, good to see you again. Welcome.
Nice seeing you, Dave.
So today, again, as we'd mentioned, we'll be talking about working from home. So today, as we're recording this, is St. Patrick's Day, hence the green tie. Happy St. Patrick's Day. But it was a year ago. I remember downtown Holland here was pretty much empty. Went to the Curra to pick up some corned beef and cabbage for lunch, and there was nobody around. And we were forced to kind of go into this new world of working from home. And while a lot of businesses or employees or employers were used to that, not everybody was. So today we want to talk to you about the importance of what to consider working from home, what to do, what to consider, etc. So again, Steve, we mentioned it's hard to believe, but it's now been over a year since we've been into this working from home. And a year ago, we were forced into it, right? We didn't really have a choice.
Yeah, that's correct. No one asked me.
No, that's true. So yeah, basically COVID has accelerated this change. Now you could have made the argument that as technology was evolving, having everybody in the office 100% of the time was going to be changing eventually, but COVID did accelerate that. So a year ago, most of the networks for our clients were designed with sort of the older style of, hey, everybody generally comes into the office. We work here from the office. And so most of the solutions that we had were designed for that. But again, a year ago, we went from, work is work and home is home to, is it work from home, Steve, or is it live at work? I'm still not quite sure.
I don't know. I dedicate a section of my house to what I call the work side. So it depends.
Yeah. So when we went to this work from home or live at work a year ago, a lot of our clients and a lot of other people that we've talked to there was no time to really respond correctly. It was literally all hands on deck. Let's just get working from home and do what we have to do. Unfortunately, we thought, hey, this is 2 weeks, no big deal. We'll be back to the office and deal with it later. 2 weeks became 2 months, has now gone on to a year. So a lot of places are still operating in the mentality of, hey, we're getting by, but they haven't really thought through what it means to have employees working from home or working remotely. So if the first thing we want to talk today about is, Steve, something that is probably the most important thing. And if there's nothing else today, takeaway would be have a policy, right? Policies and procedures. I hate writing them. I hate reviewing them, but it is super important to a business, right?
I agree. Yeah, you have to let your employees know what your expectations are, what the rules are for what they can do, what they can't do when working from home, especially when it comes to their technology, because you can't leave it up to them. They're not IT professionals. They may not know to make the best decisions or have the information necessary to.
Yeah. So again, a year ago, we were just forced into it, but time has moved on now. So if you don't have a formal work from home or a technology policy, I would either encourage you to develop one, reach out to us. We have some resources with some templates that you can use. But the biggest thing is to spend some time thinking through what should our policy be? Because if there is nothing and you don't communicate it, people will just fill in their own minds and do whatever they think is best. And again, when we're responding and we're dealing with COVID, we'll just deal with it. But again, we want to be intentional about things and not just respond, kind of, however we feel about it. But really, I mean, so what's your policy? I mean, do you allow personal devices to access either your corporate network or your cloud services? That would need to be in there. What else, Steve? What else would you consider in that?
What happens if your employee has a problem with their personal computer? Do you pay for the IT to repair that, or do they have to pay for it? What happens if they don't have antivirus? Do you pay for it, or do you make them pay for it? What antivirus do they have to use? Things like that. So many other things I could discuss, but just start.
Yeah, so if it's your personal computer and you bought it, it's likely that you have some of your own financial data on there, pictures, sensitive personal information. Maybe you've got maybe your copy of your wills on there, or other things that frankly you just want to keep personal. And me, I'm 100% fine with that. I mean, I like the line between work and personal. But if suddenly it was one thing when we just said, hey, if you have a personal computer, use it. But now it's been dragging on for a while, and we'll start adding on, clients will be adding on new employees in the future. Do you require your new employees to have their own personal computer? Steve, I think we're on the kind of the same page that if it's when it comes to technology, we believe the employer should be providing it. That's our position on that. I'm not saying that's right for every client all the time. But certainly I look at it as technology is sort of a tool that we use to produce our products and services. And frankly, it's a really important tool that has a huge impact. It's a big lever on how our organizations operate. But again, without a policy, how do these people know? Second thing here, Steve, thinking about work from home is phishing.
Yeah, definitely.
What should we think about when it comes to phishing here?
Obviously, with everybody working from home, it's a lot harder to communicate, and the hackers know that. They're well aware that if you get an email from your boss saying that you do something, and you can't just walk across the hallway and ask them. So when it comes to phishing, just I think it's more important than ever to be training your employees how to spot phishing attempts, what to do. Who to talk to if they think they're being phished, or how they react to that. It really makes it more important than ever.
Yeah, we saw the number of phishing, not only attempts, but unfortunately successful phishing attempts in the last year as people were working from home. Part of it, I think, is you're not in the office, you're not quite in the work mindset. Part of it is everybody's just trying to get by. And so is it unusual that suddenly my colleague is emailing me from, some weird personal Yahoo email? We're trying to figure things out. So, our level of suspicion on using a personal email address for work, it goes down when it's work from home. We just sort of expect that. So that's one of the things is that, the number of successful phishing attempts has gone way up in the last year. Third thing to consider, if you don't have an office, right? So we've actually had, Steve, not a lot. We've had a few clients who have said, hey, you know what? Forget it. We're throwing in the towel on having a physical office and we're going virtual. We've had a lot of clients talk about thinking about that, but I think as far as I know, we've only had a couple or a few who have actually done that. So one of the questions is, okay, well, before we had a server, we had a firewall, we had some of these other things at the office. Steve, do we even need a firewall or a server if we're not in the building anymore?
That's a good question. It really depends on how you work. I mean, do you have applications that have to be installed on something that everybody shares? Do you have data that you need to share that you don't want to put in the cloud? How comfortable are you putting your data up in the cloud? A lot of other questions, but really it starts with first asking, what do we need to do our jobs?
Yeah. So let's just say that, okay, so Steve, we have QuickBooks and maybe we've got some files that we share, and maybe we have a line of business application that runs SQL or whatever. Could you move all that to the cloud? Maybe. Yeah, definitely. I mean, on the one hand, you could just virtualize it, put it in Azure, and then dump the physical server, and then your server would be somewhere else. There's some things around group policy, the way that Windows servers are made that you need to consider. We've seen with some of our smaller clients, they look at it and say, well, hey, there's only 5 of us. We all know and trust each other. Maybe a server for a group policy is not as big of a deal. But it's the quick answer is, do I need a server if I move out of the office? Maybe, maybe not. Like you said, it depends on what you have, but it is a consideration. I touched on this a little bit, Steve, but the fourth thing to consider is a firewall. So when you're working in the office, again, these legacy networks that we designed, chances are, if you're one of our clients, you're behind a good quality business class firewall. What about when you're working from home, Steve?
Well, consumer level firewalls aren't designed to be as secure as business firewalls. They're designed to be convenient. That's the balance that you play with security versus convenience. And when you're working from home, the downside is you're removing one layer of your security. Security is always best in layers, and that's one thing you have to consider. So you have to think, how am I going to improve some other layer to make up for the loss of my firewall? The option is you could VPN in, and that is a possibility, but doesn't work for everybody. Some people's internets have problems with VPNs, and it's not fast enough or stable enough. So it's really something to think about. You can't just abandon that protection and then not add something else to make up.
Yeah. What about the fifth one here? So personal devices, right? So work from home. Hopefully you have all of your employees working remote, working on a corporately owned and managed device, but there's a good chance that it's not. What are some of the things to think about there?
Once again, security. Do they have an antivirus? Is it being monitored? What do they have access to? Maybe if they're going to work in their home computer, maybe you need to decide, should we limit their access to the fewer things, just because they don't need it, and we just want to reduce the risk. Once again, like I said before, one server breaks. Do you want to make a policy that their kids can't use it? That's the reason that we definitely recommend using a corporate control device, because there's a lot of questions, and how far do you want to get into controlling what someone can and cannot do with their own device?
Yeah, and also I think one of the things to consider is, when it comes to personal devices, why would you want to or not want to allow your employees to use personal devices? Computers can be personal. PC literally means personal computer. They can be personal, right? We can have pictures of our kids or wedding videos, or notes that we've written, or our finances, things like that. Maybe things that we don't necessarily want our employer to know about. And suddenly, if it's your personal computer and then there's work data on that, it can blur the lines. It falls into this gray area between, is it work or is it personal, and who's responsible for it. Providing those devices simply takes that away, and we just say, hey, look, this is just a work computer. I remember back 25 years ago, it was a huge deal to have a laptop, right? When your employer provided a laptop, because those things were expensive. And it was awesome. And then, a perk might be, hey, I can use my work computer for a little personal. Nowadays, we have smartphones, we've got tablets, the cost of computers has come down quite a bit. Another thing to consider is, a lot of times the argument for using personal devices is the cost, right? An employer might look at it and say, I got to buy a new computer every 5 years for this employee. And let's just say, between you include the time to get everything transferred over and set up, let's just say $2,000. Okay, we'll round up. Okay, let's say you get a nice setup here. Let's just say it's $2,000. You say, oh my gosh, I could save that $2,000 every 5 years. So the way I look at it is, I say, well, yeah, you could, right? And $2,000 is $2,000. But I look at this as the cost of just a computer. Okay, let's expense it over 5 years. Okay, that's 2,000 divided by 5 is what, $400 a year, Steve?
Mhm.
400 divided by 12. I mean, we're getting down to where this isn't that when you compare it to the cost of not only what you're paying the employee, but also what the employee can produce for you. It's pretty insignificant, right? I mean, if it's costing you $400 to a year to own that computer plus the support and everything, that's way less than what you're paying that person. And on top of that, it's a fraction of what they're producing for your company. So for me, yeah, okay, so you could save the $2,000, but the headaches and everything else, that to me, it's just not even worth it. And like you had mentioned, suddenly it's a work computer. We don't want these unmanaged devices connecting into the network, right?
Yeah.
Kids like to put, what are the kids playing today, Steve? Fortnite? Is that on a computer? Minecraft? That's on a computer, right?
Minecraft, yeah. Blocks, I
So
think it
okay,
is.
so the kid, they go and they want to find some hack for it because they want to be able to cheat and beat their friends, and just so happens that hack that they found or the crack is infected. Next thing you know, your personal computer is infected because you're using it for work 8 to 5 during the day, but then your kid's going and using it after dinner to play video games, and the next thing we know, the corporate network is having an issue. So it really blurs the line, and it to me it adds a layer of complexity that is quickly lost. Any of the savings that we'd have on the capital expense is quickly lost by trying to manage and reduce these other risks. To me, it's just not even worth it. What
Yeah. So
about go ahead, Steve?
I was going to say, so what you're saying, Dave, is that the cost of having them use a personal computer is more than you think the cost of actually buying that computer.
Yes, and it's not
Yeah.
because I own a lot of stock in Dell and HP or Apple or whatever. Yes, I do have stocks in those companies because I think they're great companies. Frankly, the margins, I mean, for us to sell computers, we don't sell computers because we're getting rich off it. We do it because we like to help control that whole process. And the large part about having a business is maintaining a certain level of control to have reproducible, predictable results. And that's what a part of maintaining control over your clients' computers is. How about the next one, sharing files? Considering it when you work from home. Now, a lot of our clients we've helped them solve these issues, but for a lot of places, they're sort of in limbo, right?
Yeah. I mean, before it was just you just connected a network with your computer, powered on, connected, and you had all the files you needed. And that was the old style of pre-COVID in-office network. And now, being from home, the options are you can connect remotely into that network, and that has its own risks, obviously, if it's a personal computer. The other options, you can move to the cloud. And of course, it's a shift that requires time and money and effort. But those are really your two options. So your decision needs to be made. Whether just maintain or, I mean, if you're never going back to the office again, as you mentioned earlier, Dave, about servers, do you really need to have your files in your office anymore? Does it really matter at this point? Or can you just move into the cloud and not to worry about them anymore? So,
Yeah. So while part of me, Steve, does miss the fact that we don't have our files stored locally because
yeah.
that's sort of the technology that I grew up with, part of me is a little nostalgic for that. But 99% of me is thrilled that we've moved to the cloud. Putting things into SharePoint, OneDrive, et cetera, I think it is fantastic. But again, not every organization,
Yeah.
depending on what your workflows are, or your systems, your software, et cetera, there may be reasons that you don't want to do that. So this is not just a blanket go and do it. But personally, we had migrated to Teams and SharePoint and everything before COVID, and it made the switch a heck of a lot easier. With that being said, I personally prefer to work in the office. I find that the home office is not where I'm the most productive. There's a social aspect to work. But when it comes to like sharing files and things like that, yeah, definitely something to consider. This next one here, number 7, Steve, this was an interesting one. A lot of people weren't prepared for this, and this was in some ways a little bit clunkier of a switch. Phones, right? So we kind of assume that almost everybody nowadays has some type of a phone, whether it's a cell phone or a landline. But the way that call flows were designed before, phone systems aren't upgraded as often as a computer or a server. And so it's not uncommon to see analog phone systems or digital phone systems. And setting up forwarding to homes and things like that, let's just be honest, in the year 20, last year's 2020, we're in 2021 now, having an old analog phone system that only works at your desk, I mean, there are places for that, right? There are places where we have, but it's just generally we've moved on from that. There are better solutions, but a lot of people were kind of stuck on the old way of doing things, and so suddenly, you weren't giving out your work number anymore. Now you're giving out your personal cell phone number. And on the one hand, it may not add anything to you, right, Steve? I mean, you sign up, everybody does unlimited calling now. But
Yep.
suddenly you blur the lines a little bit more between work and personal.
Yeah. And
Then
I'll
you
tell
start,
you,
go ahead.
I was going to say, Dave, sorry, just to interject, but I'll tell you, I get phone calls from personal numbers and I often don't answer them.
Yeah.
So, when your personal number starts showing up at your clients, do they answer it? So,
I had somebody ask me years ago why they would ever consider a business phone system. They were a startup, and my answer was, when you're in startup mode and you're scrappy and you're just trying to fight for survival, it probably, I mean, depending on who you are, you might not be worth it. It might not, might not need to. But as your organization matures and you become successful and you start to think about the future, uh, what if that employee leaves? We started a business and we're so energetic and eager and hopeful, and that was so positive. But sometimes employees leave. Okay, so what if you've trained your customers to just call that employee's cell phone number? They're gone. They own it, right? Suddenly you've got a workflow issue where the flow of work through your system is now changed. So maintaining that control, for instance, our phone systems, whether it's Digium, Sangoma, Teams, whatever, you have a smartphone, you can put the app right on there. It's seamless. So that's another thing to consider. So if you haven't addressed that issue moving forward, something to think about. Number 8 here, Steve, on the list, the culture, right? So every place has a culture. Culture is not if you have a ping pong table or if you wear suits and ties or if you have free donuts on Friday. That's not culture. Those might be perks or benefits or standards. Culture is things like, for instance, one big part of our culture, Steve, is our first core value of we own it.
mm-hmm.
Does your culture, how does it handle, how might it change from not being in person? A big part of our culture is being neighborly, right? Being neighborly over Teams is a little bit more difficult. You have to be much more intentional about it. It doesn't just happen naturally when, I think one of the things I enjoy about working with you, Steve, is our little chats, as I'm coming in or out of the office and you and I can chat. Did we do that as much during COVID?
No, it's very hard to do when we're not in the same building most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a challenge.
So thinking through culture, I just saw in the news today that Ford is going to continue to allow this hybrid work from home. Depending, obviously, you can't build a Ford Mustang from your garage, so not every job will be flexible, but a lot of the professional or office jobs will be flexible. How do you maintain the culture of innovation or collaboration? How do you maintain that? We have technology tools we have no shortage of that. We've been able to do that for a while, but that would be one more thing to think about. And the last thing here, Steve, think about working from home. This is one that I think it's not really technology related, is the etiquette of working from home. This one has been a little bit interesting. So 2 years ago, would you have, out of the blue, invited one of your customers or clients into your bedroom? Maybe. I think generally speaking, the answer is no. I would not have invited my customers to come home to my bedroom. Whether it's certainly an HR kind of a nightmare, but now suddenly we're on Teams, we have video, and we just fire up our camera. And not everybody's bedroom is nice and put together, and there's some things to consider when we suddenly fire that up. Another question might be, would you want your customers, we blur these lines from sort of this image that we want as a company to suddenly it's like, okay, well, Steve, you can do your own personal things on your own time. I'm not going to interfere with that. I don't know what your experience has been on that, Steve.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, but if you don't have a policy, Dave, I didn't know that I had to take down my my vintage '80s posters. Come on.
There you go.
No, that's true though. I mean,
yeah, it's if you haven't thought through it and you haven't come up with your policy, people are just going to do whatever they think is right. And sometimes it doesn't matter. For instance, you might say, I frankly don't care. And that, if that's your policy, great. At least just communicate it to people. I think that's the biggest takeaway, is just figure out what the policy is and communicate it. If you don't care if your employees are sitting in front of their, whatever it is at home, their bedroom, whether it's clean or messy or whatever, like if you don't care about that stuff, I guess it doesn't matter. But a lot of places do. We have corporate images for a reason. We think about these things. And like you said, coming up with a policy just makes it clears everything up for everybody. Steve, is there anything else that we forgot about? I know most of this was about the technology part. I think the etiquette part was, to me, was the kind of the weirdest thing over the last year. Meandering that.
Yeah, it's different. I think a lot of it is that I think a lot of us thought that we could take the office and kind of just move it to the home, and it didn't really work out. It doesn't work that way. Not quite. There's a lot more complication than that, because we're moving from a controlled office environment to our personal spaces, and we're working out of them. But yeah, I think a lot of it's just being very clear about it. Being very clear with the employees' expectations, because we're all expected to do our jobs, but it's kind of changed in how we do our jobs now.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah. So it's been a year. I have no clue how this will affect things, because I cannot predict the future, Steve. All I know is that a 2-week work from home has turned into a 1-year live at work experiment. And there are things that you need to be intentional about thinking through and coming up with policies to be clear what those are. If you need help with coming up with your technology or work remote policies or things like that, we'd be happy to help. There's some templates that we have that are free to use. So take a look for that. Beyond that, Steve, thanks for your time, and thanks for tuning in today. If you have suggestions for future topics, please let us know. Have a great day.
Yeah, nice talking to you.